Imagine being left alone in an old house for an entire weekend. For Johnny and his friends, it seemed like the perfect opportunity for fun and freedom. But what started as a night of laughter and games quickly turned into a nightmare. It was a Friday when my parents left for a long weekend, leaving the whole house to me. My name is Johnny, I'm 16 years old, and like any teenager, the idea of an empty house meant freedom. My friends, Sarah, Mike, Emily, and Kevin, were just as excited as I was. My parents had traveled to a convention and left me in charge of the house. It was the perfect opportunity I had been waiting for. For some time, I had bought a Ouija board, thinking exactly about this occasion. A gathering with friends, unsupervised, was the ideal setting to test something like this. I had stored the board at the back of my closet, waiting for the right moment to reveal my acquisition. And that weekend seemed like the perfect moment. Our house was a typical middle-class American residence, large, with many rooms, a basement that always gave me chills, and an attic full of old memories. It was an old house with wooden floors that creaked with every step and doors that closed with a sinister click. The walls were adorned with family portraits, and the furniture was a mix of modern with a rustic touch. The living room, with its large windows and heavy curtains, had a fireplace that was rarely used but added an air of mystery to the environment. The kitchen, spacious and well-equipped, was where we spent most of our time when we were together. Night had already fallen when my friends arrived, ready for a night of fun. Sarah was the first to arrive, bringing a box of pizzas. "Johnny, this house is amazing," she exclaimed, looking around with wide eyes. Mike arrived soon after, carrying a backpack full of games and drinks. "Let's get the party started," he shouted, throwing the backpack on the living room floor. Emily entered next, holding a black book that looked centuries old. "I brought something to entertain us," she said, with an enigmatic smile. Kevin, as always, came last, carrying only his phone. "I hope you have something interesting planned, Johnny," he said, looking at me with a raised eyebrow. We started the night with traditional teenage activities: video games, loud music, and lots of food. Sarah was talking about the latest horror movie she had seen, while Mike and Kevin were discussing the next school basketball game. Emily, as always, was reading one of her books. "Let's do something different tonight," I suggested, holding the Ouija board I had hidden until then. The room went silent for a moment. All eyes turned to me. "Have you ever played with this before?" I asked, trying to appear casual, but actually I was excited and a little nervous. Sarah rolled her eyes but smiled. "Oh, Johnny, you and your crazy ideas. I'm in." Mike shrugged. "Why not? I don't believe in these things, but it could be fun." Kevin seemed hesitant, but finally nodded. Emily, on the other hand, was clearly excited. "I've always wanted to try this. They say it can be an incredible experience," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. We turned off the living room lights, leaving only a few candles lit to create the atmosphere. The soft glow of the flames danced on the walls, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. We sat in a circle around the coffee table, placing the Ouija board in the middle. My heart was beating faster as I explained the rules. Everyone must place their fingers lightly on the planchette. Don't push, just let it move on its own. We should never play alone, and we must always say goodbye at the end of each session to close communication with any spirit or entity. And please, take this seriously. We don't want to upset anyone on the other side. Everyone place their fingers lightly on the planchette, the movable piece of the board. "Let's start," Emily said, her voice full of anticipation. "If there is anyone here, any presence, please give us a sign." The room was so quiet that we could hear the sound of each other's breathing. For a few minutes nothing happened, and we started to laugh nervously. Sarah looked at Mike, mocking. "I guess the ghosts are on vacation today." Mike laughed, responding, "Maybe they're scared of us." Kevin, still skeptical, gave an exaggerated sigh. This is a waste of time. I tried to keep the seriousness, insisting, let's try again, but this time, everyone needs to focus. Emily nodded affirmatively, closing her eyes for a moment, as if she was really trying to connect with something. Spirits, if you are here, please move the planchette, she said, with an intensity that made all of us silent again. A few more minutes passed, and Sarah, trying to relieve the tension, started to hum a silly melody. We all laughed, breaking the silence once again. Maybe we should ask something more specific, I suggested, trying not to sound disappointed. Spirits, who among you is here with us? Kevin snorted, but kept his fingers on the planchette, while Emily looked intently at the board, waiting for a sign. However, after a few more minutes of total silence, it seemed clear that nothing was really happening. Eventually, everyone let go of the planchette, resigned. I told you this was nonsense, declared Mike, taking his hands off the board. The atmosphere became light again, and we laughed at our failed attempt. Despite this, a small part of me couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed. The next morning, the sun streamed through my bedroom window, announcing the start of a new day. My friends started to leave early, still joking about the previous night. It was quite a night, Johnny, said Sarah, giving me a quick hug before leaving. Mike gave a friendly slap on my back. Let's do this again someday, he said, with a confident smile. Emily and Kevin also said goodbye, leaving me alone in the big and silent house. I spent the day trying to occupy myself with mundane tasks. I cleaned up the mess we left in the living room, washed the accumulated dishes, and even tidied up my room. Time seemed to drag on, and I couldn't stop thinking about the failed attempt to communicate with the Ouija board the night before. As the day turned into night, the feeling of unease grew. I tried to distract myself by watching TV and playing video games, but nothing seemed to work. When darkness took over the house, boredom was killing me, and I felt an uncontrollable urge to try the Ouija board again. Maybe it was curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, but I knew I needed to return to it. I went down to the living room, where the board was still on the coffee table, now only partially illuminated by the dim candlelight. I placed the planchette in the center of the board and took a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and fear. If there is anyone here, any presence, please give us a sign, I said aloud, trying to sound brave. This time, the response was immediate. The planchette moved under my fingers, forming the words, "We are here." A chill ran down my spine, and my breath caught in my throat. Who are you? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The planchette began to move again, slowly, as if deliberating each letter. That which should not be contacted. My hands trembled, but I kept my fingers on the planchette. Where do you come from? I asked, feeling my heart race in my chest. From the abyss, they replied. What do you want? I asked, anxiety growing inside me. Study human beings. The response was short and cold. What do you want from me? I insisted. Soul, study, pain. The answers were enigmatic and frightening. Why me? I asked, trying to understand the surreal situation. You called us, they replied. There is no escape. The idea of beings from another world watching and studying humanity was both fascinating and terrifying. How did you get here? I asked, my mind spinning with 1,000 questions. You brought us. Each answer seemed to raise more questions than answers. Are you hostile? I asked, feeling the fear intensify. We are the end. There was a momentary relief in the response, but the feeling of being watched by beings from another world continued to be disturbing. What do you want to know about us? I asked, trying to stay calm. Everything. I remained silent for a moment, processing everything that was happening. The idea of beings studying humanity was something I had never seriously considered before. "Why are you communicating with me?" I finally asked. "You opened the way," they replied. "The way?" I repeated, confused. "Yes. Through the Ouija, the realization that I had somehow invited these beings into my life through the Ouija board made me feel a mix of guilt and terror." "And now, what will happen?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. "We will continue. You have no choice," was the final answer. The planchette stopped moving, and the silence in the room was deafening. I sat there for a long time, trying to understand what all this meant and what would come next. The session ended abruptly when the planchette stopped moving, leaving me alone with my unanswered questions and a growing fear in my heart. I tried to continue the communication, but nothing else happened. The Ouija board, which had been so active minutes before, was now inert, as if it had lost all its power. Exhausted and disturbed, I went to my room, but sleep seemed impossible. The idea that there was something beyond this world, something I had summoned, would not leave me in peace. Those enigmatic and threatening words echoed in my mind, preventing any attempt at rest. After a restless night, I woke up the next day with a strange feeling in the air. I anxiously waited for my parents to return, but the hours passed slowly, and there was no sign of them. I tried calling several times, but all the calls went to voicemail. A sense of despair began to settle in me. It was not typical of them to be out of contact for so long, and the lack of news only increased my anguish. I spent the day trying to act normally, but my mind was elsewhere. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. Every shadow seemed darker. I felt constantly watched, and the solitude of the house only amplified my fear. The Ouija board was there, on the table, a constant reminder of what had happened the night before. The next day, a loud knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find a police officer with a serious expression on his face. "You're Johnny, right?" he asked. I nodded, feeling a chill down my spine. "We need to talk. We found your parents' car abandoned on the road, but there's no sign of them." The news hit like a bomb. It took a moment to process the information before I could respond. They were coming home yesterday. What happened?" The officer sighed, showing a look of concern. "We don't know, we're investigating." The officer's words echoed in my mind. The idea that something could have happened to my parents was unbearable. I spent the day in a state of shock, trying to understand how things had gotten to this point. The police visit brought an additional layer of fear and despair, and the reality of the situation began to become even darker. At night, in a last act of desperation, I returned to the Ouija board. With trembling hands, I sat down again in front of the board and placed the planchette in the center. "Please," I begged, "tell me where my parents are." The response was quick and cold. "We took them." I felt a knot in my stomach, the reality of that statement hitting me with full force. "Why?" I asked, almost breathless. "Experiments. Never again." Despair took over me. "Give them back," I screamed, but the planchette did not move again. The answers were enigmatic and frightening. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to understand the surreal situation. "Aliens," they replied. "Why us?" I asked, desperately trying to make sense of it. "You called us. Now it's too late." The idea of beings from another planet watching and studying humanity was both fascinating and terrifying. "Will you hurt them?" I asked, my voice almost a whisper. "Experiments," they replied again. Then the board stopped giving any kind of answers, and I was left in shock, unable to believe what had just happened. Had my parents really been abducted or kidnapped by beings from another world who claimed to be aliens? Days passed, and the police investigation did not progress. My parents were officially declared missing, but deep down, I knew the truth. I felt alone and desolate, tormented by guilt and loss. The house, which was once a place of safety and comfort, now felt like a tomb filled with painful memories. Days turned into weeks, and there was still no clue about my parents' whereabouts. The police finally decided to close the case, labeling my parents as dead, even though there were no bodies or explanations. For them, it was just another unsolved case. For me, it was a wound that would never heal. The silence of the aliens and the lack of answers only increased my torment. I began to live with the constant feeling of being watched, fearing that at any moment they might return to finish what they started. An innocent game with a Ouija board turned into an unimaginable nightmare. The loss of my parents and the guilt for their deaths were a burden I would have to carry for the rest of my life. I never looked at the Ouija board again, which was now stored away, covered in dust, as a symbol of everything I had lost. And every night, before going to sleep, I looked at the sky, fearing and hoping that one day they would come back.